Okay, I think it looks like things have slowed down. What is it? 8:32. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful sunny morning here in Pennsylvania. I don't know what the weather's like. Ben said it's actually pretty nippy out there in Colorado, but it's a beautiful day here. So thank you so much for being here with us today. We have a really great program. This is a follow-up in many ways, but we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Wanted to just let you know that be a part of the conversation. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the executive director. I'm going to introduce you to Judy Hirsch.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all, sort of.
Judy's our program director, and she'll be kind of hanging out on this panel as well. Probably could answer some questions if there are any about, well, just lots of things. So we've been digging into this subject for a couple of years now, so we're trying our best to get our heads around it all. Our two special guests today, our featured speaker is Ben Cort. You're going to be hearing a lot about him from Lessons Learned from Colorado. And Ben, this is our fourth time hosting you, which we're really honored and thrilled about. He was here one time in person, and this is his third time virtually. But we are also very lucky to have with us from Pennsylvania's Commonwealth Prevention Alliance, the executive director, Jeff Hanley. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, thank you.
So Jeff is going to get us started in just a moment with some history of where we are, not history, but just background on where we are today in Pennsylvania. Just a little housekeeping. I want to let you know that we are recording this program. We're going to be posting it on our follow-up page, which is conversation.zone/cannabis. Any questions that you submit in the chat box or the Q&A box during this presentation will not be recorded. The panelists and I will see that, but you don't have to worry about that getting recorded. And we will not use names when we ask any of the questions, so don't worry about that. But you're welcome to start submitting those questions at any time. Judy and I will be keeping an eye on those. For the first hour or so, you're going to hear from our presenters. And then for the last half hour, we'll address as many questions as possible. We already received about 25 in advance during registration. So thank you for submitting those. I don't know that we'll get to all of them, but we'll do our best. And we're going to have a lot of information on this follow-up page. So some of the things that I have posted there already, if you go to that page, are Ben's program in May was his full PowerPoint presentation. So you can view that. You can also view a couple of other presentations. Dr. Joe Garbely from Care and Treatment Center talked about the addictive nature of this substance and what some of the fallout has been with the clients or the patients that he's been seeing at Caron, which is one of the top 5 rehabs in the country. It happens to be right here in the Reading area, Warnersville, PA. His recording of his presentation is on that page, as well as another presentation by David Fialco, who explains what vaping is looking like these days, nicotine, oils, and THC products. So that is there. And also our Youth Marijuana Prevention Project is linked on that page as well, because we have a lot of information there also. We have a program coming up that is sponsored by that Youth Marijuana Prevention Project, funded by Montgomery County Drug and Alcohol Program. This is called Cannabis is Complicated. This will be especially great for parents to attend. If you have a son or daughter who is experimenting or is deeply into their cannabis use, this will be really helpful to you. We have a local clinician who's phenomenal. He's been a speaker of ours a few times. His name is Patrick Dowling. He's a licensed professional counselor. And we will also have a young man who is in recovery from cannabis use disorder. And he's going to talk about his experience with high potency THC and his subsequent recovery from that. That's on October 27th. And you can, actually I'll ask Judy if you can share the online page, the conversation.zone/online in the chat box. That will take people to learn more about this and register to attend, along with other programs we have coming up. At the end of this program, you'll have an opportunity to take a survey. We really appreciate it if you can do that. It helps us to know what was working for you, what you might have wanted to hear more about, or what you'd like to hear about in the future from us. So please, even if you've been with us before, we really appreciate you taking this survey. And it'll, as I said, it'll pop up on your screen as soon as the program ends. So without further ado, I'm going to get to, we're going to actually introduce Jeff Hanley first. I think it would be nice for us to hear a little bit about where things are in the state of Pennsylvania right now. So I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Kim and Judy, for having me. I certainly appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Great to see Ben again. I started as the executive director of CPA in January of last year, and lived in Mercer County, PA for years, but also my wife and I spent some time in Colorado for a few years and lived there. And I heard Ben speak in Colorado at a school district a few years ago, talking about marijuana and the impacts to date in Colorado. And it was such a great presentation. And it's so nice to see Ben here in Pennsylvania, providing all of us with such great information and resources. So we appreciate it, and appreciate Kim and Judy, everything that you guys are doing too. This is fantastic. So I just thought I could just provide really briefly just a quick updates on some of the current legislation in the state. I'll share my screen here real quick. And so everybody can see the three bills that are currently in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. There's Senate Bill 350, 2050, and 1899. I know that Kim is going to share this and have this available to everybody. But I think the one thing that I would really encourage is to everybody go to these websites and just take a real quick look at mostly the bills, but also what committee they were referred to. So you can see here, I linked all of these, so anybody can go here and just click on the blue shaded areas and pull up those committees. So these three bills are currently in committee, which could be good news, could be bad news. The worst thing for a bill in Pennsylvania is if committee never acts on it and then it just dies. So I would recommend checking this out. All three of these committees are a majority owned or majority Republican Party. So that is good news in regards to this issue. What we're hearing, our General Assembly is back in session today. So I think, or excuse me, on Monday, they go back in session on Monday. The one thing that I definitely wanted to share at the bottom here is so you can see the session days remaining. There are not many session days remaining. And in 2020, the General Assembly must adjourn by midnight of November 30th in even numbered years due to the expiration of terms. So keep that in mind. We know that they can add session days to do voting. I can't imagine them accomplishing what they need to accomplish in 4 days through November. So I would imagine that we would see a little bit of a change, but keep that in mind. Starting Monday, we're going to hear a lot more about recreational marijuana. We're going to hear more about expansion or deregulation of alcohol policy. So anything that I hear, I'll definitely pass on to Kim and to everybody else to share. But I would, again, just recommend pulling up any of these committees. And the websites are real well done. You can just see who's in charge of each of these committees. And if they're in your area, if you know them, make a call. Here's the majority, the Republicans, and then the minority are the Democrats. If you know any of these legislators, I would really recommend making a call to their office and just talking about the legalization of recreational marijuana and what that would look like for you and your community. Again, those three bills, just wanted to finally say those three bills are in committee still, so they are all an option to be looked at and voted on. There is a resource from Representative Wheatley's website that I think Kim might share after the session, and it shows the differences of the three bills. It does a nice job of doing that, but there is a lot of other information on that sheet that really isn't factual, but you can at least see talking points from the representative standpoint on how they are trying to push this through. And all of the fact, I think he has a myth or fact page. All of those are very, very disputable, and there are many talking points available for us to sit there and say, well, wait a second, marijuana is addictive, and here's what that looks like. So I think only other thing real quick, Kim, is just medical marijuana. There's really a lot of discussion on these bills. If legalizing recreational marijuana were to get out of the committee a bill, how would that affect medical marijuana? And there's a lot of dispute between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans want to, they want to make sure that that they are looking to protect the medical marijuana current industry and what that looks like. So it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of plays out. And I know Ben has talked before about what medical marijuana looks like in some other states, especially after legalization of recreational has occurred. So a lot will happen next week. And again, we'll keep our eyes and ears tuned to it as much as possible and update the field. But now is a perfect time. Now is a perfect time to look at those committees and see if there's folks that you know and that you feel really comfortable reaching out to and just sharing your thoughts on this and what this could look like for you, for your community. And just come prepared with a couple talking points and you'll be in great shape. So we certainly appreciate your advocacy, your support. And if there's anything that I can do, just please reach out at any time. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And we already have one question, if there are any bills related to decriminalizing, and I think you'll find it. I'm just in the process of posting those materials that Jeff referenced onto that page, but you'll find that they do, some do address it and some do not. So I don't know if there's much more we can say about that at this point, but okay.
Yeah, there's nothing separate for decriminalization at all. I don't know if I see that happening. But you know, we're just hearing right now it doesn't seem like this is set to come out of committee, but it's such strange times with COVID that everybody's looking for new revenue. And when they start saying new revenue, who knows what could possibly happen. And we're working with tobacco control and some looking at what taxes on tobacco could look like, what taxes on alcohol could look like to help generate some new revenue. So as we look at those numbers and hopefully get them really soon, we'll share. So it might be an opportunity for new revenue without legalizing substance. Thank you, Kim.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Okay, and now I will turn it over to the one and only Ben Cort. Ben, are you all set to go? You want to unmute?
I think so. I was just reading Lauren's question.
Yep.
I need some help on that from you guys, but I can answer a bit of it.
I think we'll get to some of these other questions toward the end. We'll address these. Thank you for submitting those. Please keep them coming. We'll do our best to get to them.
I'm really easily distracted. So when you send them in, I'm probably, if you just sort of see me staring, it's not just because it's 6:45 in the morning here in Colorado. It's probably because I'm looking at the questions that came in, and I really appreciated the ones that everybody sent before. I'll answer a few of those throughout and then also go through them bullet point at the end. So my intent right now is to end at 9:30 your time so we can have a solid 30 minutes for questions, and between the four of us do our best to answer, or at least find you some resources, pardon me, to answer those. I'm bummed I'm not out there with you guys right now. I was telling Jeff, you know, like when it's not raining in the fall, I think Happy Valley is going to be one of the prettiest places in the whole country. My wife's from Central Pennsylvania and my little sister's in Bucks County. And that's why these were so easy to agree to do, because I could go stay with my sister and screw around with my nephew. But now this damn internet business, I don't get to do anything fun. I'm going to really try my best not to just do a repeat of conversations that we've already had. However, I've got to lay a little bit of a foundation in the two planning sessions that Judy and Kim and I have had, and trying to figure out what's relevant to this group and what might be purely repetitive. I'm going to really try and focus on a couple of specific things, which are testing and driving, because I think as you guys are considering these things legislatively, that's incredibly important, as well as what we know about mental health and co-occurring issues associated with THC. I'm also, as any of you know who've read anything I've written or seen anything I've done, specifically most interested in the effects that the industrialization has on consumption patterns, as well as the actual products people are consuming. So we're going to discuss those briefly as well. Jeff, in that paper you had, I honed in right away on the underlying part you had where it said that all three bills are encouraging small business to keep the big players out. And so I'm going to talk to that for a minute too, because Pennsylvania is not the first to try that. Okay, so let's see if I can share the screen again for any of you who have been a party to stuff that I've done in the past. Bear with me on this little bit of a review. But we gotta have some foundational knowledge, but I guarantee it won't be nearly as much as usual. All right, let me see if I can get this little block thing out of here. Okay, cool. Kim, can you see my screen okay? Everything look good?
Looks great. Sounds great.
Imagine that. All right, 21st century. This is different. We are talking about something very, very different than what you smoked in the 70s. And I think that one of the most important parts to doing a responsible job of considering this is that you've got to first recognize that we are not talking about the plant that so many people think that we are talking about. Though those days are they've passed into myth and history because this is a new school of cannabis. And for us, especially those of you who are lawmakers, those of you who are charged with representing us and taking care of us from a policy standpoint, you have to understand what it is people are consuming today for us to do a good job of actually regulating it. So the idea that we have, that we know so much about cannabis, almost always comes from our own personal experience. If not our own personal experience, it's secondhand experience. And I would challenge that other than alcohol, cannabis is probably the only substance in this country that everybody either has first or secondhand experience with. Now, the vast majority of people do not have firsthand experience with it, despite what they say. Most people have never consumed. But everybody knows a guy. All y'all went to school with somebody. You've got an uncle, you've got a sister, everybody knows someone who at some point has consumed. And the issue that brings up is that we think that we understand this because we know folks who have been exposed to it in the past. But here's the reality of it, that unless you have consumed or know very well someone who has consumed commercial products that were produced within the last couple of years, you really, your construct of what this is incredibly antiquated. And that's dangerous if you've got an industry that knows exactly what it is they're selling and what it is they're doing, and we don't understand exactly what it is we're regulating and what it is that we are trying to be responsible with. So here's all you got to do to understand the situation, these next two slides. Unfortunately, these data have not been continued past 2010. The 2011 was reporting that we got into 2010. Anyway, sorry. We're not going to see a continuation of these data, but this was amazing because it was done at a national level and beginning in 1960 and ending last measured year 2010, reported 2011. This is the percentage of THC inside of cannabis over 50 years, a representative sample from law enforcement seizures from every state. And what, couple of things for you to understand, that THC is the psychoactive component inside of cannabis. If you don't have THC, you've got hemp. You've got a really interesting textile that incidentally makes the shoes that I'm wearing at the moment, and has nothing whatsoever to do with getting high. You've got a plant that's used to build and do things with. With the THC, you get the high. So the more THC, a little oversimplified here, but the more THC you've got in it, the higher somebody's going to be able to get. Okay. So when we talk about cannabis traditionally, and something that I think is exceptionally important for you to understand, especially as you're having conversations with people who like to cite the history of it, is that when we began measuring this at University of Mississippi in 1960, we see what really naturally occurs inside of cannabis and what goes, we've seen this. There's actually been mummified cannabis plants that we found that we can test inside of tombs in Asia and Africa. And we know that what naturally occurs inside of cannabis is somewhere between a 0.2 and a 0.5% THC. That is the substance that humankind has interacted with for millennia. Of course, there were some exceptions with higher percentages, particularly around some religious traditions, but you certainly weren't seeing anything more than maybe 2 or 3% THC globally, anywhere in the world, until the 1970s. So what ended up happening, and since this is America, it's fun knowing the history and learning it a little, we can actually kind of tell you what led to this spike. And then the rest of this is just good gardening. This is just folks who know how to cultivate stronger and stronger and stronger, because in this country we like to get high. So this is the most important thing I think I'm going to show you today is this next slide. So set the coffee down, lean in, get ready to take a picture of this one, because this is, to me, sort of what it's all about. So I'm showing you 50 years in increments of 2.5%. So over the past 50 years, this is how much it's grown. I am adding Colorado to that in the blue. And unfortunately, these data will never be continued either. The whistleblower who came out with all of them. Anyway, long story. What you see here is the transformation of a plant into a commercialized drug. And as we talk and discuss the importance of understanding and regulating, we must move away from the hyperbole that describes this simply as a plant, because it is no longer a plant. This is a manufactured substance. This isn't grown outside by farmers. This is produced indoors by chemists with the intent of getting as much THC into a product as you can to sell for as cheaply as you possibly can, because the math is really, really simple. Colorado has relatively good data. We don't have anything after sales year 2018, but in sales year 2018, of all of the weed, THC, that we sold in Colorado, which was a lot, almost 80% of all of the THC was purchased by 20% of the consumers. Meaning that those who consume on average 8 times daily are the ones who are driving 80% of this market. They want stronger. They don't just want stronger, they need stronger, because the way the tolerance works with this, very, very different than alcohol and opiates. Tolerance to THC is a different thing. So what you see and what happens is that fringe, the smaller group of people who are absolutely buying and consuming the most, are the ones who drive it. And that's why you get pushing potencies like this, because it's just driven by a market need. So again, I would challenge the idea that this is the same thing that humankind has consumed and interacted with for millennium. It absolutely is not. It has gone from a plant to a drug when we moved away from good gardening to good chemistry. And the chemistry is even better now, and I thought it was nice that there's an intent to try and keep it small and keep the big industries out, but that will not happen. You might figure out keeping them out for a little bit, but the reality is that the chemists from here, the chemists from California, the folks with the PhDs who are actually manipulating this plant to get that amount of THC into it, they're going to be in Pennsylvania in a minute. The same way they went to Canada, the same way they went to Washington and Oregon. And there's a multi-billion-dollar, there's a lot of different ways to count how much it is, but probably around a $20 billion industry behind this movement. It's not so much a movement as it is a marketing campaign at this point. And you had better believe that they are not going to let a state the size of Pennsylvania allow the mom and pops to make the money from that. Mom and pops might make it for a couple of months, but give it a minute, MedMen will be in town like they are everywhere. Next most important thing that I decided you had to understand is that the DSM, which is the manual that mental health professionals and psychiatrists use to diagnose, it's where you get the ICD code so that we can, bill insurance and all of this kind of business. The last version of it, the 5, which came in, I think, it's been 3 years now. Somebody will correct me on that if I'm not wrong. If I'm wrong, included objective diagnostic criteria for cannabis withdrawal. And the reason why this is so significant is that the idea of physical withdrawal from THC up until the last couple of years was like a funny joke. Like they would be like, oh, I must be withdrawing because I stopped laughing at SpongeBob. Like I must be withdrawing because I haven't bought Cheetos in the last 2 weeks. Like cannabis withdrawal from a physical standpoint wasn't really a thing. But in the last couple of years, it has become a thing. So my actual job now, and the reason why I'm up in the mountains, I took over a small men's only treatment program up here called The Foundry, and I sit at the CEO desk for it. And while our numbers aren't big, we work with 25 or 30 guys at a time, we're on the absolute front lines of this. And we see, and just like everybody in my field is saying, and if you ask them, ask your colleagues and friends in Pennsylvania what they're saying with it, that the physical withdrawal and the need to treat that physical withdrawal from THC is one of the biggest problems that we're seeing over the last couple of years. And there's not, there are no pharmacologic interventions for it. It's not like we've got drugs to help people come off of this. It's also something that's so little is known about that it's not often being treated adequately. And I'll tell you that it's a very, very real thing, and it's a big deal. And it's also important for those of you who work in my field. I believe that there are some of you on here, fellow mental health professionals and prevention folks, to understand that as somebody is going through this for really out to about 16 days with a resurgence, it seems like 10 to 14 days or so, they can be getting their asses kicked physically. They can be really going through some hard stuff and struggling. And so for us, I think it's part of our responsibility to learn more about this and understand the ways that we can treat it. But the simple fact that today we are categorizing THC with objective criteria for physical withdrawal should show you how very much this drug has changed, because it wasn't. So the most important factors when we are discussing dependence, and now we're gonna shift into diagnosable substance use disorder or cannabis use disorder, are these: age of onset, frequency of use, and THC potency. And what we have found is that, so when we consider THC and addiction, it is very real, absolutely objectively quantifiable, and it's not easy to treat. I'm not going to go into the details of how this is quantified, because I've done that in a lot of different places. But when you hear the marijuana is not addictive sort of a thing, that's old school. That's somebody who hasn't stayed up on anything, or it's somebody who's trying to manipulate the facts of it, because objectively speaking, without bias and without the politics of it all, THC absolutely is addictive. And I mean, to the point where we get physical dependence on it. One of the reasons why it's not easy to treat is because you have people saying stuff like that. It's not addictive. Nobody's ever died from it. And I'll tell you, again, those of you who work inside of my field, consider the microaggressions that exist in there. When we get somebody in a treatment and we say something like, "Oh, it's just weed." Well, you don't need a detox. It's only that. It's very difficult for us to treat, I think, because we bring so much bias into it. And if you can imagine the social fallout that there is for somebody who raises their hand and said, "I need treatment for my THC addiction." If somebody says, I gotta kick heroin, it's time for me to get off meth, I need to stop drinking, everybody rallies around them and supports them. Since a lot of the times our communities are made up of other people who consume THC, when we say, "Guys, I think I need to stop THC," the number of hurdles that they have had to cross and jump over to get there, a lot of the times is pretty profound. Like, it takes a lot of effort to stick with it, as everybody's going to push back on it with these totally antiquated ideas that it's not addictive. I think these probably have to be the same folks who are saying it's not warming up and COVID's just going to go away and everything's awesome. There are people who just aren't really paying super close attention to what's actually happening. It often requires much longer stays in treatment, as well as antipsychotic medications, to balance the psychosis that happens, that we'll discuss a little bit in the beginning. And the trick with it requiring longer stays is that as insurers, I'm sure they know exactly what's happening, but insurers don't really like paying for things. What you see is big pushback from insurance companies on actually staying in treatment for as long as it takes. We had a case recently where it was 6 weeks before the young man's psychotic symptoms actually died down to a point where we could start to treat. And of course, at that point, insurance had long since stopped paying, and we were just floating him. He was staying here, and a big part of it was because I was really curious personally about how long it would take for him to kind of come back to earth. And it was a pretty beautiful thing to see when it happened, but it takes a longer time to treat him. So traditional addiction rates to THC were around 10%, and this is what we used up until about 2012. And in 2012, there were some studies that would suggest that it was, depending on those factors I showed you before, onset, frequency, and potency, that it would be up to about 15%. In a huge meta study just published this month, we see that those are actually reaching as high as 30% as a result of the increased potency. So a rate of 30%, an addiction rate of 30% to a substance is pretty significant. So that means that a person will meet the objective diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder About a third of everybody who is exposed can get to that point. Again, this is why you've got to stop thinking about it as the Cheech and Chong plant and the giant, 2-foot long doobie that somebody's rolling up and the smoke all day and get a little hungry sort of a thing. Were it still that substance, you absolutely would not see this. So a lot of these patients with a substance use disorder to cannabis require physical detox as well as medical intervention. And the medical intervention, at this point at least, revolves mostly around antipsychotic medications. Because there's a difference. So a lot of folks who come in to get treated for THC are experiencing psychosis. And what you've got to do, which we'll talk about in a minute, and what you've got to do is determine and figure out if you're looking at a psychotic episode or a psychotic break. A psychotic episode, you come back from. A psychotic break, something kind of shifts up here. So a lot of the times we find ourselves administering short-term antipsychotic drugs in order to get to a point where we can actually treat the patient. And again, I fully recognize that when you talk about this stuff, and if we had longer, I would have done a much better job of dancing and easing into it, so you wouldn't think I was some crazy reefer madness kind of dude. But we just don't have time for it. The reality is that, guys, I'm a recovering drug addict raising. From THC was a big part of it. 24 years sober, raising 3 kids in public school in the weed capital of the country, who runs an addiction treatment program here. I got a pretty damn good viewpoint. And I recognize that some of this might be hard for people to hear, that no, you can't require physical detox. No, they're not actually taking antipsychotics. Yes, you are. And yes, that's exactly what we are doing. And I hope that a lot of us can shed our own bias and our own desires for this to be a quick fix and a panacea and something that'll make everything work, to recognize that what's actually happening here is different than what we thought. So here's what a commercialized market looks like. And again, I don't have time to go into the economics of it. Just brief, so you understand, the vast majority of THC is purchased by the most dedicated consumers, the people who use multiple times daily. And because of the way the THC binds and the way that your tolerance grows to it, you just got to keep getting it stronger to get the same effect. So remember the couple of slides ago where I told you that what naturally occurs, and up until a couple of decades ago was 0.2 to 0.5% THC. We're seeing products right now that are pretty much pure THC, 99.99% THC, which is remarkable for a lot of reasons. But the one of the ones I'd like to point out to you is that no recreational state, no matter how hard they've tried, has ever limited potency. We attempted in Colorado 2 years later, when a lot of people here felt buyer's remorse. A big group of folks got together and they tried to impose a limit of 16% THC in Colorado. And the reason why they used 16% was it's the best information that we have about the effects of high potency THC is capped out at about 16%. We really have no idea what 20% THC is doing to the human brain and body from a scientific standpoint. I can tell you anecdotally and what we see, but we tried to stop it at 16% here in Colorado, and you saw an industry unite like nothing I'd ever seen before. And they said, well, it'll kill the market. It'll kill the concentrate market. You can't do that. You don't understand what you're doing. The problem is this industry banks on the fact that we don't understand what they are doing. And what they are doing, like any other industry that has addictive potential, anyone, food, opiates, alcohol, porn, it doesn't matter. every single one of those industries has to drive user engagement. And the way that the cannabis industry drives user engagement is by getting more people dependent on it. And the higher the THC potency, the more dependent. The other things that matter the most are certainly when a person begins consuming it. And they're going to say the same stuff that the tobacco industry said, because they say it here in Colorado: oh God, we'd never want a kid to get high. Oh, good God, we'd never want a kid to get high. And I've got literally over 600 photographs just of the most egregious, clear, dedicated marketing to children, using cartoon characters, using stuff that would make Joe Camel turn over in his grave, Spuds McKenzie look like nothing, because we don't recognize that this is what they're trying to do, trying to drive use so that they can make more money. One of the things I love about Kim and Judy and the entire organization here is the focus that we have on children and the importance that you guys see in the developing young brain. And I think it's beautiful. And I think if you guys do get an established cannabis industry inside of Pennsylvania, you might have some friends there, because they absolutely also have a focus on youth and on the developing young brain, because that is how they drive profits. That and creating stuff like this, 99.9% THC. So while we all have these ideas about the, mom and pop kind of farm to table cannabis and everything, this is what's really going on behind the scenes. Drive potency, drive use, drive early engagement. And so here we are thinking, well, we're going to regulate this thing and we're going to teach people how to do it. And we're going to, because when I was a kid, this is how we drove around. And meanwhile, the industry is like, awesome, Pops, you go ahead and figure out building a regulatory infrastructure for your freaking Model T while we're ripping around in this thing. And let's see who comes out with the money at the end of it all. Because weed isn't weed anymore. It's not this bud that you see here. It's wax, and it's butter, and it's shatter. And again, we don't have I don't have the time to get into all of this, but what you've got to understand is that the lion's share of the market, the most money in Colorado, is being spent on concentrates. These are concentrates. This is what the cannabis market in Colorado looks like. It's not 60-year-olds buying buds. It's 21-year-olds buying this and sharing it with other young people. This is a concentrate, so concentrated cannabis, and you'll see your proposed bills all have language that includes this in it. This is what the commercial THC market looks like. It's not plants and buds and pretty things. It's this, because this is how you get higher THC potency into a product so that folks can overcome the tolerance that they've built up. And here's really the future of commercialized THC markets, a thing called a distillate. This is what our market is sort of centered around in Colorado. When you go into dispensaries, it's on counters. I go to lots of dispensaries. So that's what's being sold as weed. And I'd like everybody just to take a second and look at that and shake your head and say, that's not weed. No, it's not. It's a concentrated THC that started looking like this. This was before it was cooled. That's great. Distillate, water clear, no alchemy, just pure science. Can you imagine the scientific acumen it must take to go from a green organic material to this? And then we package it up and we sell it to you like that. It's not weed, but it's absolutely being sold as, and this is the majority of the market in Colorado. There, you think you'd ever see the day? That's a commercialized cannabis market. This is all THC. And then vaping, you guys have better things about this. I'm not going to cover it. Edibles are a huge problem. The issue with them is that you have multiple servings, and you guys will too, multiple servings inside of one package. And because of the okay, so there's no FDA oversight. Nobody is overseeing this at the federal level. So that means every state has to manage all of these food products and topical products and things, which is definitely something that states are not used to doing because it's FDA's job. But since this is federally illegal, FDA can't have anything to do with it. So what is ended up happening is the edible market is exploded to include things like this. So edibles, we traditionally thought of as like baking an organic material into a brownie or something like that. Here's an edible that's infused with a distillate. So if you remember the distillate, what I was showing you, that clear liquid that's 99.9% pure THC. It's not just THC, it's isolated at the submolecular level to pull out just the delta 9 THC. So now we have, and because we do it by weight, not by potency, you've got these. So this is 100 milligrams, right here you can see it, even though Colorado law says that you can only have 10 milligrams per serving. What the package for this will say is that you're to separate each one of those into tenths before consuming. And again, it's not then eating 10 milligrams of organic material, it's 10 milligrams of distillate. Here's what do you call it? Like a graham cracker size thing with 1,000 milligrams, 100 legal servings, and it'll say on it, separate into 100ths. The problem is that young people just don't do that, but does a nice job of getting them to be returning dedicated customers. Look, these have 1,000 milligrams in them. Sodas, cake pops, chocolate bars. This industry is insidious, and this industry doesn't have regulatory bounds. And nobody understands it well enough to actually go in and regulate it and say, hang on, what exactly is in this poo-tang pie cannabis that's being sold as medical? How are we assured that it is not full of things that it shouldn't have in it? How are we assured that it actually has the potency it says that it does? And we're so far behind in our understanding of it, they're just kind of doing what they want. So ketchup and hot sauce, coffee, K-cup coffee, THC-infused lemonade, ice cream and candies, granola bars, THC-infused nasal mist, topical intoxicating THC, THC pills that you can swallow and get high, THC-infused lollipops, THC teas, little gummies. There's things made to look exactly like other candies, obviously, with 100 milligrams of THC in it. Pot rocks, that's not a joke, that's a real thing. Again, very clearly not being marketed to the 40-year-old responsible user, because I'm not psyched on sour apple pot rocks. I think my kids would be, and they know that. There's Keef Cola makes a soda with 350 milligrams of THC in it. You can actually get for less than that now. And a little warning label on it that says separate it into 35 servings. And that is what that little cap is right there, 1/35. So go ahead and put Keef Cola into YouTube tonight and see how many of those kids are separating it into 35ths. If you keep up with rap culture at all, here's your pre-made THC syrup. And I thought that was pretty incredible. There's THC water, seems to me to be the apex of things. The point being, once you've got this commercial market in place, everything that can be put into your body is going to be made with THC in it. That means how are you going to tell if somebody's eating a regular candy bar or a 350 milligram THC candy bar? The liquid THC, if the 5-hour energy they just took is 5-hour energy, or if it's actually THC. There's a intoxicating underarm applying THC. There's THC breast spray. The list goes on and on and on. Let's move to mental health consequences associated with casual use. So casual use, and for this particular incident, we're looking at 10 to 12% THC. 10 to 12%. And we know the higher the THC, the higher these numbers. And this is the part of this that I just, listen, if we decide to move down this path in this country, fine. And it's what I said in my book. I think that there are probably better things to spend our time and treasure on, but if this is what we decide that we want to do in this country, fine. We just have to be honest about the risks associated with, because it's being sold all the time as this perfect, there's no issue, everything's great. God, why didn't we think of this 50 years ago, sort of a thing, when that's not honest. Because the mental health implications that are associated with this are fairly significant. And they're things that every single day of the week I'm seeing and working with. And to write this off is to write off the suffering of a lot of people with significant mental health issues that are either complicated or created by their THC consumption. So the risk of depression is 1.4 times increased with casual use. We do not have any idea if that is causal. So do more people consume because they have a depressive disorder, or do you get a depressive disorder when you consume more? Don't know the answer to that. We know that acute anxiety is causal. So we know that, and the higher the potency, it would seem, the more acute or the louder the acute anxiety is. So we know that somebody who tends to be anxious to begin with, when they are consuming these higher potency, and higher potency here, I mean, I'm talking about like 10%. And certainly it escalates from there, that it causes acute anxiety. And there is an increased risk of anxiety disorders. We don't yet know if it's causal. We'll see what happens with that one. I think kind of common sense is going to tell us something there, but we'll wait for the science to hash that one out. You have considerably worsened outcomes in treating bipolar disorder. A pretty brilliant psychiatrist who I know, who spent a lot of time considering and thinking about this, said what I think it has to be is that this higher potency stuff is kind of always changing the chemistry of the brain in unpredictable ways. And so it makes it very difficult for us to keep up with balancing medications for it. And then the risk of attempted suicide requiring hospitalizations, which is sort of the big measuring factor, because we can ask a person questions there. We know it was a very serious attempt. But they're not deceased, so we can probe into it a little bit. The risk of suicides requiring hospitalization is twice as likely in somebody who consumes casually, which should sort of be the end of it. And if you look at Colorado's numbers, this is where I wish everybody who is thinking about this would do. If you just look at Colorado's numbers, causation, correlation, I don't know, and we will never know. But we have never recorded higher teen suicide rates in Colorado than we have the last 6 years. We have never recorded higher overdose rates from opiates than we have the last 5 years. So this isn't this thing that you're going to introduce and everything's going to get fixed. Use of any cannabis at all is associated with a 1.5 time increased risk in psychosis. So psychosis is kind of this big generic word for, the pejorative would be crazy, but for mental illness, and it can show up in a lot of different ways. And regular use, so twice a week, would be associated with a 2-fold increased risk of psychosis. And again, here, if you look at this third bullet point, when we're talking about high potency, I want you to keep in mind that we are talking about a 12%. So higher potency cannabis, more frequent use, and genetic susceptibility, so the presence of one of those, can increase your risk of psychosis by 8-fold. Listen, if there was like a chemical that was found inside of this coffee cup that I'm drinking from right now that did 1/5 of this, there would be a ban on it tomorrow, an absolute across-the-board ban until we figured out what it was. Because we finally are starting to wise up and care about mental health in this country a little bit, and to have setbacks like this is pretty ridiculous. So any use before the age of 18 sees a 2.5 time increased risk in the diagnosis of schizophrenia. That risk increases as dosage increases. So probably pretty causal. So here are the acute physical health, and I'm going to just run through these because I want to talk about the testing: impaired memory, motor coordination, react time, singular focus, reduction in perceptual accuracy. Those are all very, very, very important skills when it comes to driving. And if you look into, so everybody keeps good numbers on this. The Rocky Mountain HIDA report, high intensity drug trafficking area, has some great numbers, but so do all of the departments of transportation in all legalized states and the Traffic Safety Institute. The rate of our fatal crashes where the driver is positive for THC is, it's a line on the graph that just goes straight up. These are skills that you need for driving and working. So here's the issue with it. Chronic use, pregnancy. I'm sorry, but I have to run through it because I want to make sure we get our time going here. So here's the testing and driving. You cannot measure impairment any other way than with a DRE, a drug recognition expert. That's a specially trained member of law enforcement who's going to put somebody through about a half an hour's worth of tests, physical tests, to see if they're intoxicated or not. Because THC is fat soluble, we have seen it stay measurably in a person's system for up to 72 days with Marilyn Hustis. Look at a beautiful, wonderful, elegant study. So we also have found, as you're seeing people say things like, well, we'll be able to test this way, and don't worry, this product is going to come out that law enforcement will be able to do a roadside. The method of ingestion makes that whole thing moot. We can tell when somebody has smoked, but as you saw a tiny little sample of, there's so many ways to consume that aren't smoking. Where it ends with us is that the presence of THC inside of somebody's system, be that urine, hair, blood, the presence of THC does not indicate intoxication. And Colorado has decided on 5 nanograms per milliliter is our benchmark for sobriety, or 0.08 equivalent, if you will. At less than 5 nanograms per milliliter does not indicate sobriety. So you may ask, okay, well, if under 5 nanograms doesn't indicate sobriety and over 5 nanograms doesn't indicate intoxication, how do you determine intoxication? Back to the first bullet point, you cannot measure intoxication other than done by a DRE. So you could have a person who consumes on Friday night, goes into work on Monday, alongside somebody who was consuming the entire way into work that day, or who ate an edible, and they could be involved in a workplace accident. Both of them are going to test the same, depending on the way that they test and how things go. One of them clearly intoxicated, one of them not. But as soon as you change the laws in a state where it's a person's right to have THC inside of their system, everything changes. And I will tell you guys, maybe it's because it's early and I'm tired, and I just saw how old I look in the mirror versus how young I looked in that picture, and maybe there's just not a lot of time anymore. I'll tell you that until we have a reliable and responsible way of measuring intoxication at the roadside, anybody who moves forward with this is just checking a box, being okay with more intoxicated driving. And I really don't think that in the 21st century, I have to make much of a case about why driving under the influence isn't a good idea. Here are a couple of places to look, please. I'm a board member with these guys, SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, much more politically minded than I am, but good place to start if you're interested in getting involved. NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse. SAMHSA, Smart Colorado is a group of moms, basically, that personifies the buyer's remorse, who have joined together to try and tell other people what's going on. And then just make sure that you use a critical eye when you're looking. I subscribe to probably every single pro-cannabis newsletter and website on the planet, just so I can keep up with things. And just remember that the more money's involved in something on either side, the more apt people are to sort of twist it to what they want to do. There's a copy of my book. It should be at your Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever. I don't think it's a particularly good book. It's not high art, but I think there's some helpful information in it. 7:30, nailed it. Questions?
Awesome job, Ben. You did it. Thank you so much. Great stuff. We have some really great questions. I want to start with a comment, though, that's quite heartbreaking, and I want to thank this person for sharing this. This person said, "Thank you so much for telling the truth about marijuana. Our son died by suicide in April. He had marijuana-induced psychosis. There was no convincing him that marijuana was the problem. And the treatment center that he attended failed to deal with the root issue, even though we shared with the physician and social worker that we could see that marijuana abuse and the psychosis that accompanied it were the problem." And I'll just say that, you know, Judy and I are both certified family recovery specialists. I facilitate a support group every week. I've been doing that for 9 years, the support group thing, 10 years really. A week doesn't go by that somebody isn't lamenting the fallout, certainly not always to this extreme. And again, we're so sorry for your loss. But it is just infuriating when I hear people say, nobody ever died from overdosing on marijuana. Well, first of all, an overdose does not necessarily mean death. An overdose means toxicity. You can overdose from a lot of things. You can overdose on aspirin, you know, so that doesn't mean you're going to die, but it's certainly, what I'm really seeing is the loss of motivation, the loss of connection to the family, the isolation. I mean, our kids do not need to be isolating more than they already have to right now. Social media is contributing to that. Let's not add something that one of the number one side effects of using this substance is lack of motivation, apathy, that sort of thing. So I just want to say this is a truly serious topic. And when people say, you know, it's not fair to incarcerate someone, of course we agree with that, but it's also not fair to minimize the effects that this has on a young person. That's the end of my speech about that, but I really want to thank this person for sharing that.
Well said. And cannabis-induced psychosis is a very, very real thing and a very loud problem. And I'm so sorry. We see it every day here too. I'm so sorry. Kim, I can go through these questions, the pre-questions that you want, or we can run through the ones. I've tried to answer some of them. How do you want to do it?
Well, let me just say that a question that came up a lot is, how do we help our community members understand this? Share this video. If this doesn't help explain the potential, you know, challenges, I don't know what will. So please share this video. And I did load Ben's PowerPoint on that page that I mentioned. The video will be there later. Tons of resources are there. And for folks that are asking about parenting and the challenges of convincing our sons and daughters, and by the way, Judy and I both had those conversations several years ago with our sons, who are thankfully in recovery today. But that program on October 27th is going to address a lot of that. That is going to be very specifically about parenting. So that's on our online page. So again, check that out. But Ben, I think if you want to pick some of those advanced questions that you'd like to address, go right ahead.
So let me run through the advanced ones because you guys sent those in, and then I'm looking at the other ones. I'll get to those as well. How can communities be helped to understand that marijuana use can be harmful? I think that the most important thing is that we all just keep having honest conversations, and that we not shy away from the pushback that you're going to get with folks, because a lot of the times, especially as somebody who the circles that I roll in and travel in tend to be a little bit more on the left-leaning side most of the time. When you bring this up, you know, folks are like, whoa, hold on, what are you talking about? Just be willing to have the awkward and uncomfortable conversations, and know that if you got the facts behind you, let the pundits be the pundits, and let the people who are just trying to profit off of this do and say their thing. I think it's our job to move this conversation into a more intelligent place. So how can you help? And especially about seeking treatment. So this is, listen, not all treatment is created equal. In another life, I spent a lot of time, and then still in some ways continue to spend a lot of time making sure that people in my industry are actually doing a good job with it. look into the program really well. Ask them some hard questions, and here's the bottom line. This is something that for me, it's 12-step work. I'll put my email address inside one of these things. If you got questions, specific questions about how to help a kid, I would be more than happy to either walk through that with you or to put you in touch with somebody who can help with it, because that's the way we stay sober, is doing those things. I thought this was a wonderful question. How do I balance my support for decriminalization of cannabis and my concern that the damage that frequently being high has on people? I support the decriminalization of cannabis. I have written this for years, for pushing a decade now, that I don't see any issue at all with decriminalizing possession. And realistically, we had de facto decriminalization in Colorado prior to this whole, like, all these people were arrested sort of a thing. They were fined. I mean, anything under 2 ounces of cannabis in Colorado was $100 fine, and most of the time it was dismissed like you would a traffic thing, but that's what they were calling arrests. So I don't think that there is any problem at all with supporting decriminalization of a thing and saying no to the industrialization of it. This is where I think the vernacular gets super duper important. When everybody says we want to legalize, yeah, you don't. Most of the politicians who are involved in this thing, when when decriminalization comes up, their lobbyists push back hard, and they say, well, no, decriminalization is not really a solution. The only solution is, letting us make hundreds of millions of dollars in doing it. And that's just ridiculous. The efficacy of this drug and behavioral health treatment per diagnosis. So pretty much every behavioral health condition you can think of, PTSD, ADHD, and then certainly the more severe ones, bipolar disorder, depressive disorder, anxiety, THC is contraindicated for the use with. And we certainly would not want somebody using it, like freely, like take as much of this as often as you want for as long as you want. It would be done in a physician monitored way with an actual prescribable medication. One of the big things that people miss is that one cannot prescribe marijuana. It can't be done. It's a Schedule I controlled substance. The way that your law is written allows a physician to recommend the use of. But you can't prescribe that somebody smoke a plant, because that's not how it works in this country. Things go through FDA approval. And fortunately, thank God, because some of them are doing some amazing things, we have some FDA approved cannabis-based medications, because there absolutely is medicine inside of the cannabis plant. Absolutely there is. The trick is to separate it out and to give it to folks effectively. But to use smoked cannabis as an intervention for behavioral health issues is a no-no. Is it possible to help our adult kids understand how weed and other substances is negatively affecting their lives? Yeah, absolutely it is. Everything is possible. And I think the first thing that we have to do is to get a little bit educated on it. I for the most part, was tired of traveling and wanted to be with my kids, and that's why I wrote that book. And I have a chapter in there called something to that effect, how to argue with a 17-year-old or how to talk to your kids or something like that. There are lots of effective ways to do it. And I'll tell you that the first recommendation that I'll give you is don't come into it angrily. Don't walk into that conversation when things are bad. Don't walk away from something like this with information that becomes weaponized and yell and confront and holler. I've always found that the very best way to have hard conversations during good times is to sit down with the person I love at a place that they really enjoy and feel comfortable. If it's a dinner, if it's outside, and then to try and bring it up. When we come into them with anger, what they hear is that anger. When we come into those conversations with genuine love and concern, it's much easier for them to understand that. So this is, in my opinion, is cannabis addiction most similar to alcohol addiction, or does it have a different effect? So what you use is just diagnostic criteria for them. The symptoms are obviously very, very different. The lethality associated with alcohol is far and away the most dangerous substance inside of this country, unless you were to count tobacco, but from immediate deaths. And it's not necessarily that alcohol is way worse than all these other things. It's just more commercialized and used. So we covered that one. You asked, how can we convince the legislators that legalization doesn't increase revenue? You just simply show them the numbers that have come out of Colorado, California, everybody else, and then you hope that they actually look at that and don't get pulled into the political discussion. There was for somebody, I got you, Kim, for somebody who really wants to understand that question, there was a brilliant researcher who sat on the pro-legalization side of this thing, who unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, I think, named Mark Kleiman out of the University of Washington. And Dr. Kleiman had dedicated the last, I think, 20 years of his career into trying to determine exactly how you could adequately tax this vice substance to pay for the impacts of it without just building the black market up. And as you've seen, Colorado, California, all these places that have big commercial industries, our black market has dramatically increased. It hasn't decreased, it's increased since. So where Dr. Kleiman came up with what was almost an impossibility, like to tax it at a high enough rate that you would make up for the costs associated with, you would just create a black market. To tax it at a low enough rate to get rid of the black market, you wouldn't even get close to it. You have to look at tobacco and alcohol as the paradigm, any vice substance. So we've got 60 years worth of data, and for every dollar that we earn in taxing alcohol, it costs us about $9, and for every dollar that we earn in taxing tobacco, it costs us about $11 societally. Kim?
I was just going to add, thank you. Those are really great points. On that follow-up page, the cannabis page, Judy put together some talking points. I also shared that piece that Jeff has together, that Jeff Hanley mentioned at the beginning. So also a finder for how to find your legislator. So that, I think, is the most important thing you can do. And they should be paying attention right now, because if you haven't noticed, it's election season. So.
What kind of tax structure do you recommend for concentrate THC products? I am sort of a you figure this out, and I don't live there. Don't tell me in Colorado what to do, which was what pissed me off, because like all the people who were pushing this were from California and stuff when they came out. And so I'm going to let you guys make up your own decision on that, on just about everything. But this is where concentrates just have no place in the world, none. Like, they don't belong until we have a much better understanding of what they are doing to the human brain and body. The only place that they have any worth is in the portfolio of the cannabis industry. They don't belong in a person's brain or body. So what is my suggested tax rate for that? None, because don't sell it. Because when we're selling it, we're just kind of pandering to what it is they want to do. How did I overcome my struggles? Well, I just woke up one day and everything was better. No, it was awful. A lot of 12-step was what did it for me. I got involved in that world, and it's a very long and interesting story that took place, a lot of it between Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. But what they say, you got to get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And eventually I just got that gift of desperation where I wanted something else. Inevitable. Got that one. Okay, why are states putting this question on the voters' ballot if the lessons from Colorado show it's a bad idea? When's the last time we did things that made great political sense? I don't care which side of this thing you're on. If you like the dude from reality television, or if you like the dude who's been in politics for 50 years, I don't care who you're going to vote for. I'll ask you, do we really have a choice between the finest two Americans? When has politics made sense. And the reason why these things end up on a ballot is because you have massive commercial industries behind it. And those industries can get anything they want to on the ballot. I've joked before that if you give me enough money, I'll bet you I can get on the ballot and convince enough Coloradans that in order to keep our fires at bay here, we should sacrifice a puppy every Monday in town square. You give me enough money to sell that message and you can sell anything.
Ben, I just think we need to note that in Pennsylvania, we're not talking about a ballot issue. We're talking about legislation. So it could happen without anybody's input other than the people in Harrisburg.
You know the only people who've done that so far? Quick little trivia here. The only state so far who has passed legislatively? Anybody?
Illinois? No.
Illinois. People of Pennsylvania, you can put yourselves up right next to the state that brought us Rod Blagojevich and everything else that takes place in Illinois. Okay, I'm going to run through the questions that we have here. I didn't think medical marijuana could be prescribed to children until I did an assessment. So again, I'll make sure you get the vernacular straight on it. You cannot prescribe marijuana, it can't be prescribed. And I don't know what the specific laws are in Colorado. You can be under 18 and get a recommendation here. Judy, do you know the answer to that one, or Jeff?
Yeah, it is illegal in Pennsylvania for anyone under the age of 18. However, a caregiver can get registered and on behalf of the their child or half of the youth, on behalf of the youth.
There are some FDA-approved medications that, one in particular, that can be just fantastic for children, especially children with a very rare seizure disorder called Epidiolex. And so that is a cannabis-derived medication that is prescribed often to young kids. Well, I mean often, being there's probably a couple hundred kids in the entire state on, maybe 100 kids in the whole state, because it's such a rare condition. But other than that, no, nobody's telling a kid that they should smoke something. So explain how tolerance is different from alcohol. So here's going to be I'm going to give you a 2-minute answer to a 20-minute question. You get to a point of tolerance with alcohol where your body doesn't let you get any more tolerant. We've seen this, jaundice, liver failure, kidney failure, etc. You get to a point where ethanol so saturates things that you're just not able to keep putting it in because you'll die. And then ultimately, it'll take you less and less and less alcohol the further you go down the spectrum to get intoxicated because your body's no longer processing it well enough. The difference with THC, and because there is no lethality associated with overdose from, it works very, very differently. It saturates and binds to cannabidiol receptors rather than, anyway, so what ends up happening is we just oversaturate those receptors and oversaturate those receptors. And different from the other drugs, particularly alcohol, you have cannabidiol receptors throughout your entire body. I mean, almost every little bit of you has these receptors inside of it, top of your head to your toes. And so what we'll end up doing is creating a need for introduced THC to bind to these receptors in such large amounts that what your body produces naturally won't be able to bind to it. So the way that it's different is the tolerance is essentially unending. Like you can just keep getting more and more and more and more tolerant. I really encourage you to watch some YouTube videos. And you guys have seen me before. You know, my favorite guy is somebody called Stoners Are Weed. And because he has a program called Kill a Friend Day where he gives people their first concentrate hit. But the thing that's so interesting about him is he consumes concentrates regularly, and you can see people who the first time they consume a concentrate, acute psychosis, passing out, go crazy. You see a blood pressure spike and things like this. And then you see people who've been consuming concentrates for a little bit. They can consume and consume and consume and have no noticeable affect change. So you can keep going forever. Withdrawal symptoms, probably the easiest thing for you to do is just Google that. They'll give you those definitively. The most frustrating ones that we see for people are sleep and anxiety and diet issues. But anxiety and aggression are pretty big ones too. You mentioned deaths and seem to imply that there have been overdose deaths caused by overconsumption of THC. Are there such cases? No, not really. I mean, there's like one or two in the literature, but I think they're probably pretty crazy and weird little one-offs. However, to say that no one has ever died as a result of is asinine. It's to say that no one has ever died of tobacco because no one has ever overdosed from it. To say that no one has ever died from falling asleep at the wheel because they didn't overdose falling asleep at the wheel. People die doing dumb things. When you're intoxicated, you tend to do more dumb things. And there is case after case after case in Colorado. I wrote a chapter about it, even back then, about the people who took the lives of others directly because they were intoxicated. So no, overdose, not a thing. It's not a thing. You're not going to overdose from THC. For those of us not experienced in this area, can you explain how butter wax and shatter would be consumed? I understand vaping. Yeah, yes. But is shatter smoked like crack? Yes, it is. It's a rock. So you would smoke it like you would smoke anything else in rock form. So vaping is obviously the easiest because there's no associated smell with it. But it's a hot knife. It's a superheated needle. That's how you do that. Judy would like to answer this question live. Is that what it said? No.
No, you would like to answer it. Yeah.
Isn't there some controversy about the study that showed association with marijuana use and schizophrenia in teens? So it's not a study, it's multiple studies at this point, like multiple. And no, there's no controversy unless you want people to allow your industry. And the controversy is going to come from the people who are waiting to profit on it. What can scientists, researchers do to contribute to this issue? We have a couple of pretty brilliant minds here in Colorado working on some large, long-term, which you must understand is the importance of longitudinal as opposed to quick short-term ones. And the information that we need more than anything, we're getting in utero and early life exposure data right now at a University of Colorado hospital and Dr. Paula Riggs. But what we really need is more and better long-term understandings on brain and body, everything below the shoulders of actual high potency. So not 16%. That would be the most important thing. The other thing I would be particularly interested in is the sociology around. There was a book for those of you in the medical or scientific world, Springer, who publishes the medical textbooks that our doctors use when they're in med school it's where all the textbooks are. This year they published Cannabis and Medicine, and it had experts from every single field of medicine explaining interactions with drug, different, all sorts of stuff from every field of medicine. And I actually got to co-author the section on treatment and recovery from. And one of the things that we could use some more research on is recovery from as well as drugs. What specific regulations would you recommend limiting location of cannabis stores, advertising, potency? I wrote all of that in the book. So again, more commercials for it, which I usually suck at doing, but I make $1.50 every time you buy one of those, unless you buy it used. So go ahead. And I think I stopped charging you guys long ago to do this. So buy my book. But I wrote about that. It needs to be a progressive policy of discipline that's associated with until you eventually get to a point where the economics of it don't make sense for them to do it anymore. But I wrote all about how I would do it. Did I miss me, comparing how the recreational legalization will affect the medical field? No, because I didn't really do it. And I think that's probably way better asked of your experts here in Pennsylvania who have a better idea. I worked for an alternative school in Pennsylvania. We had an intake interview with a student who was prescribed medical use by a doctor. So again, recommended versus prescribed. He, just like every other Pennsylvanian, just like every other American, cannot be prescribed cannabis. They can be prescribed cannabis medications or recommended cannabis. My advice to law enforcement officers when talking to students and parents about marijuana is to be as informed as possible. I think a lot of the times when we come at them and they hear old guard, they shut down. When, if we're not up to date on the language, and if we come in and we're like, hey, you kids and your reefers and you're smoking on your Mary Janes, and if we're not informed and if we don't understand what it is they're actually consuming, they're going to write us off and not listen to us at the beginning. So I guess it's the balancing the fine line between trying to be cool when we're not cool. I don't know, maybe you're totally cool, Fred. I'm not at all. So I don't try to, use words and be like, yo kids, this presentation is going to be straight fire. Y'all should hashtag, what I don't do that shit. What I do is just try and be me, but also try to be informed. So I would recommend, sir, that you just be hip to and aware of what it is they're doing, and then go into it asking questions more than telling. And then if you've got enough decent information, you can field those questions well. The other thing I will tell you is, as somebody who part of my living amends is trying to make up for the crappy stuff that I did that involved law enforcement down there, you call me absolutely anytime. And here, let me put my email in here and I'll help. If it's specific stuff, if it's not, I'll help you any way I can, because I have a great respect for the work that it is that you and your fellow officers are doing, and I thank you all for it. That's all the questions. Fred, there's my email address. What am I missing?
There were actually a couple in the chat box that we didn't get to. The definition of casual use.
Actually, it's not super well defined. We're using 2 times a week.
Okay. And just for clarification, you cited that study from Australia earlier, just kind of looking like, is this really real? 30% is now the rate of addiction. Can you clarify that?
Yes, it's really real. So the study is, it was funny, Kim, when you sent me the link, the PubMed link, it had that other researcher's name on it. I had seen the original publication with Wayne Hall et al., who is sort of one of the leading thought leaders on, but yes, it's absolutely real. And it's not some, Dr. Volkov at NIDA said 3 years ago, and she was saying publicly 3 years ago, just wait, you're going to see 30-40% addiction rates once the science can actually show what we're seeing on the streets. And the problem is, to get journal published peer-reviewed science takes time. To throw out some sort of tagline and quick little answer to something takes no time. So science takes time.
Wonderful. I can't believe it's 10 o'clock. This has flown. Jeff, do you have any last thoughts, comments?
No, none at all, Kim. Thank you again for having me, and I appreciate it.
Ben, can you provide us with a citation? Somebody asked for the guy from Washington, Mark Kleiman, about the taxation of the substance. Can you get that to us sometime?
So that's a summary of about 20 years of work for him. So look into who Mark Kleiman is and read any of his research. I think it's Kleiman.
Okay.
Brilliant guy. But totally sat on the other side, thought we should fully legalize, thought we should fully allow for commercial sales. So somebody who, he and I would be on opposite sides on the panel, but brilliant researcher, and really couldn't quite get there.
Okay, thanks.
Just put a link in the chat box. Yeah. So Ben, we can't thank you enough. That was fabulous, and you're such a dear treasure for all of us. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We had more than 100 folks with us consistently this morning, which is amazing. So thank you all very, very much. Jeff, Ben, Judy, thanks. Great being with you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. follow up on that page. Oh, and take our survey, please. When this ends, take our survey and follow up on that page, conversation.zone/cannabis. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.